Grief can be so painful and so powerful, but it is necessary to the healing process. Hello, and welcome back to the Reimagining Ourselves podcast, where we spend time dreaming of what we could heal and who we could become. My name's Cassandra. I'm a wellness coach and therapist with a decade of experience working in the mental health field and a lifetime of experience learning how to heal and grow from pain and trauma. Chances are, at one point or another, you've had a personal experience with loss or pain that resulted in grief. Maybe it's a childhood abandonment, a painful breakup, or the death of a beloved family member. Maybe you clicked on this video because you are currently experiencing the endless depths of grief. Or maybe it has been too painful to allow yourself to feel, and you've been trying to numb or avoid that pain, even by intellectualizing and learning more about it. Maybe it's someone else that you love that you know is grieving and you want to know how you can be there for them. Maybe you just know you're carrying grief and you can't even pinpoint where it's coming from. I'll share a little more about my personal experience with grief later, but first let's talk about what grief is and why it is so necessary. So grief is, first of all, a universal human emotion. We experience grief when we lose something that we love, that we are connected to, and it's also present when we aren't able to get a core need met. Of course, most commonly we think of the immense grief felt when we lose a beloved person and we have to do the unthinkable and live life without them. But at this moment in time, there are also people experiencing grief due to living without a home, finding out that they are infertile, or watching a loved one go to jail. So there are also circumstances outside of the death of a loved one that can result in grief. We also experience collective grief. And that's what the next episode is going to be all about. We're going to talk about our collective grief over things like wars and, injustices and environmental destruction. And also how we can collectively use that grief to transition into healing and to use it to spur action. It was just too much to add to this episode. So check back for that one. I am not someone who can stick to an uploading schedule. That's just not me. So expect that anytime from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. But I am really excited to have that conversation with you because it is just in the air. Grief is not even really just a state, it is a process that we move through. Grief does not have a clear endpoint, but it does have a purpose to help us experience the gravity of the loss that we had and to move through that pain. Grief is an experience of emotional suffering that can have all kinds of physical manifestations as well. Chest pains, shaking, a feeling of being physically overwhelmed, etc. The manifestations of the pain of grief are as unique and variable as the people experiencing it. Now, there is a crucial difference between grief and despair. What I'm referring to as grief here is often clinically called uncomplicated grief. And what I'm referring to as despair is sometimes called complicated grief. However, a lot of sources will categorize somebody's experience as complicated based on it extending over a certain amount of time, and I wholeheartedly disagree with that. Grief exists entirely outside of our human concepts of time. And while expanding your life may help shrink the enormity of the grief you feel, it may be the case that you are always brought right back to crying on the bathroom floor when something hits that sore spot just right. So that is one of the big differences in the way that I'm using those words, is I'm using them as states, not as diagnostic categories. But despair is definitely associated with depression, so I'll talk about that a little bit more too. Grief is a powerful experience of the depths of human emotion. We are capable of immense joy and immense grief. We are capable of immense joy and immense pain. But grief is like this clean pain. It might hurt so badly, but it does not feel corrosive or unhealthy. Despair, on the other hand, is largely involved with secondary emotions like hopelessness or pessimism or misery. These feelings that kind of settle in. And so you could see how this could cross over into what we call mental illness, an emotional pain that you're stuck in and that is interfering with your level of functioning. These feelings are paralyzing and all encompassing in many cases. And I don't know that it is very realistic to just say avoid falling into despair, because I think there are many times where it's nearly impossible to avoid. It is still useful to notice this difference between grief and despair, because that allows us to both keep ourselves safe and hold it in our mind that we have the option to begin taking steps back towards grief. And grief is where the intense energy of our loss can move us through the process of healing. If you're in despair, there is a simple practice that can move you through the grieving process. It's just to create the space to really feel your sadness and pain. It can feel very counterintuitive to do this. Most of us do not like pain, and we may be conditioned to avoid it at all costs. We often actually sink into despair because we are trying to avoid this pain. We don't want to accept it. We are terrified of the depths of it. And we live in dread and depression about the idea of it. It's like there is this scary thing coming for us, and we are in agony because it keeps catching up with us no matter how much we run from it. But when we accept that the thing happened and we allow ourselves to experience the pain of that, we can learn some things. First and foremost, we learn that it will not kill us. Actually experiencing our emotional pain will never kill us. It is trying to make it stop that can become lethal. The second thing that we will learn is that the intensity of it will not last forever. Everything changes, everything ends, even your pain and grief, if you allow it to. That doesn't mean that you will stop feeling it altogether in your lifetime, as we discussed. That does not necessarily happen, but it will change enough to allow you to participate in life again. And that brings me to the whole point of this conversation today, that grief is crucial to the healing process. We need grief because it allows us to move the energy of our loss and transform it into something new. It is intense and often a very uncomfortable experience. But once the fire hose of emotions has had a chance to slow to a steady stream, you may discover some ways of directing that energy into something beautiful. This could be some form of memorializing a loved one, or a new understanding about the role that the loss played in your life, increased empathy for others experiencing a similar pain, a drive to initiate change in the world, and so on. So I'm going to give you quite a personal example from my life. I had a childhood in which I was exposed to poverty and addiction and physical and mental and sexual abuse and social services and removal from my parents. And all of these situations were chronic and ongoing. The most profound grief that I've experienced thus far in my life has been for the safety and security that I lost at a very young age, and also for the ongoing patterns of intergenerational pain that I saw within my family. And when I had my incredible beautiful sun, I discovered that I was not done grieving. New layers of grief have hit me as I feel the pain that I was not able to have this kind of childhood, and my parents were not able to have this kind of childhood, and my grandparents were not able to have the kind of childhood that is as gentle and secure as the one that I'm able to provide him with. I have learned to heal from my childhood experiences, and a big part of that healing has been allowing myself to feel that grief when it arises, and it continues to arise, and then to let it go and to let it be transformed. I let it move through me, and then I allow that energy to transition into kindness and compassion. My experiences have built me into the person that I am today. The kind of mother I am, the level at which I connect with others, the work I do in the world, all of it is transformed out of feeling the grief. And I still have moments in which I can feel that transformation taking place. It's an ongoing process, but grief is the crucial doorway through which the pain of loss is channeled in order to become something beautiful. If someone that you love is grieving, the biggest thing that they need from you is the room to express their grief in their own way. They need space to allow their emotions to arise and for them to be able to fall apart, whether that is in your presence or alone. They also might need someone to reach a hand in and pull them out of the depths of despair by reminding them that there is still joy and beauty in the world. Many times grieving is never truly over. It can be a little bit wild and sometimes it feels unbearable, but it demands to be felt. Grief transforms into something that is able to be integrated into the collection of experiences and memories that make up who you are. It is the necessary shadow side of love, compassion, and empathy. Grief and love are two sides of the same coin, and only the depths of your love can predict the depths of your grief. Grief is physically and emotionally painful, but like childbirth, it is pain with a purpose. It keeps us close to our hearts and our humanity. There is so much beauty in grief. Beauty in the depths of our human experience and our endless capacity for love and loss. And grief can be transformed into action in the world as it shows us what we love and what is worth saving. Thanks for being here, especially if you watched all the way to the end. And if you are grieving, know that we are all here with you. I hope you can find some comfort in the connection you're currently sharing with everyone who has been before you and will come after you. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll meet you here next time on Reimagining Ourselves.